Hello, everyone, and welcome to this FinTech Futures webinar. I'm Lisa Moyle, Director of Strategy for FinTech Futures. I'm also joined by Tanya Andreasyan, Editor of Banking Technology Magazine. Sorry. We've pulled together a great panel to discuss the impact of Brexit on UK FinTech. We have Wintermeyer, CEO of Innovate Finance, Diana Paredes, CEO and founder of Suade, Mike Laven, CEO of Currency Cloud, and Yvonne Dunn, partner at Pinsent. We'll also be live tweeting this webinar, so you can join in the conversation by using the hashtag FinTechFuturesWeb. So we're looking forward to a lively discussion. I'm going to pass on now to Tanya, just to bring us through some polling and the questions.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Lisa. This is Tanya Andreasyan, Editor of Banking Technology. So hello, everyone. Just to let you know that we'll be holding a live Q&A with the audience at the end of the webinar. So if you've got any questions or any comments, please submit them via the blue Ask the Question button. And you can do that during the presentation or at the end of it. Also, we'll be running a poll on the subject of, will Brexit affect the UK's status as a world-leading fintech hub? So you're very welcome to participate in it during the webinar or at the end of it. Thank you. And now over to Lawrence to kick us off with an overview of the impact that Brexit is going to have on the fintech sector.
Thank you. It's Lawrence Wintermeyer. I'm the Chief Executive of Innovate Finance. And Innovate Finance is an independent members association dedicated to the UK global fintech community. We have over 250 members, from startups to global financial institutions. And in the aftermath of the Brexit vote result, we polled our 250 strong community to get a sense of what their priorities are, what we should be communicating to UK government and the venture capital institutional community, and to really try to gauge a level of sentiment post-Brexit about the London ecosystem. So I'd like to spend two or 3 minutes sharing some of those messages with you, and I'm certainly happy to take any questions at all. We've had on the Innovate Finance team more than 150 calls with different members and players in the global fintech ecosystem, including venture capital, a lot of the other hubs. So we've got a reasonably good view of where certainly the sentiment of the global fintech community is today. The first and most important thing I think to say is that the fintech community, when polled before Brexit, 80% of the community surveyed polled to remain in the UK, which was very consistent with other UK surveys coming out of the digital community, in particular the Tech London Advocate Survey, and a number of the other surveys coming out of the professional trade associations and the financial services sector in the city. In light of the vote, everyone, I believe, in the community is respectful to the vote, and now we're all very much focused on moving on. The number one finding from our member survey, and we had 30% of the community to respond to this survey through both a digital survey and discussions and outbound calls, that the number one item coming through for the fintech community is ensuring that we do everything we can to maintain access to investment capital and liquidity. I think that's sensible. In any time of uncertainty, investment generally moves to the sidelines. Certainly the anecdotal information from the global VC community is everyone is committed to their fintech portfolio plays. Everyone is committed to the London ecosystem. But I think we might expect signs of slowing investment, and we're starting to look at that a bit further. Universally, the message across the whole of the community, whether that's startups or institutions, the number one priority is ensuring that we maintain access to the single market and the passporting rights that come along with financial services. So to be clear about this, access to the single market for the UK and the 28 member European states is predominantly a goods-oriented free trade agreement. The UK has a 50% export market in Europe and a reciprocal 50% import market from Europe on goods. Passporting protects financial services across a number of categories, and most members have put that as the cross-membership number one priority. But along that, ensuring that we have the access to the best fintech talent in STEM and STEAM, which is an issue that goes beyond Europe, both with Tier 1, Tier 2 visas. The community wants to make sure that the government knows that we need access to that, and that's generally resonant in the digital community. So those are the big highlights. I'll leave it at that. There's all sorts of information anecdotally coming in from the community that I'd be happy to pick up, but suffice to say, we delivered that, and delighted to have Lisa Moyle from Informa with us last night at Westminster. We're the secretariat for something called the All-Party Parliamentary Group for FinTech, where we delivered a report talking about the positive effects that FinTech has had on retail consumption here in the UK. So we delivered all of those messages to UK Gov, and even though UK Gov is in the middle of a leadership contest and really working out what it needs to be talking about post-Brexit, it's certainly listening. So we were assured by that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lawrence. That was really interesting. And moving on to you, Mike, and thinking about some of the big issues that Lawrence and questions that Lawrence has laid out for the sector. It'd be interesting to hear, from your perspective, from your business, what, do you agree with kind of what those key asks are for the sector, and what are some of the challenges and the opportunities for your business?
Sure. So I am the CEO of the Currency Cloud. Currency Cloud is a fintech company. We were, I think, a charter member of Innovate Finance when it first started getting organized, and have been part of the London fintech revolution since the beginning. And we're in the cross-border payments business, so we're quite involved both with Europe and the rest of the world, and have been involved with the whole fintech community, both as customers and partners and colleagues for quite some time. So though, of course, those who know me know that I would be happy to speak about politics and policy, in fact, I'm going to talk really more practically, since in terms of running the company and looking forward, there's a series of practical things that we have to look at. Also, I have a very short-term look at this, and I think this is quite important in terms of looking at the company. I'm going to just assume that we're in a very extended, prolonged period of uncertainty, and that there's nothing that I can do about that. In fact, I might even want it, so that I'm not assuming I'm getting any resolution on anything that I need soon. So the question for a company like ourselves is, how do we operate in a time of extended uncertainty? I look at it like this. I have three important constituencies that the company has to look after. The first one, and perhaps the most important one, is the employees, of whom we're about 20% EU, very consistent with other people in the tech sector. And we started with very few employees. We now have about 100. We're going to add more. And I would assume that the ones that we add will also come from throughout the EU. We have to, as you do in Silicon Valley or anywhere else where you're a tech hub, recruit the best people in the world for a very series of specific jobs and make them feel comfortable and happy here. And that's the most important thing to me going forward. The second constituency is my customers, who then some need assurance that, one, that I'll be in business and providing them the same service. And the third constituency is my investors. So from a very practical perspective, employees, customers, investors, each want something and need something slightly different. But I'm going to assume that life is uncertain. When I look at all three of those things, and I can talk a little bit about the investors and the customers as well, and how we would treat those, I think the most important thing for me in the near term is that the EU employees that we have in the company and the ones that we're going to be looking to recruit in the near future feel secure. Again, my business is really based on getting the best talent that I can find, and making those people feel secure in the near term is the most important thing. And that's actually the most important thing for my customers and my business, because in a tech company, the value of our business is actually the value of our employees. So in a time of uncertainty, that becomes the most important thing. In terms of looking at what I have to do on a short-term basis, London is far and away the best place for us to have our business. The natural advantages in our market are unquestioned. They've been there for 100 years. They're going to be here for another 100 years. There'd be no question of our moving things strategically, though tactically we may need to make some investments. But practically speaking, I need access to the single market. But if I'm going to live in a time of uncertainty and don't know whether I have that, then I'll pivot to Asia and the U.S. I mean, there's places that, as we have a global business, my responsibility to the investors is actually to keep growing my business, and I'll grow it where I can. So I think of it in those three constituencies and what I have to do to take care of it.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Mike. That's really interesting, and obviously that issue around access to talent has been really at the fore of some of the discussions with regards to the tech sector. Diana, can we pass on to you now and hear, again from your business, what are the challenges and if there are opportunities of a post-Brexit world?
Yeah, sure. So hi everyone. I'm Diana Paredes. I'm the CEO of Suade. We're a RegTech FinTech company based in London. We've been around for almost a couple of years now, and we're probably in a different stage than the company that we were just listening about. We're in the process of growing. We've been doing quite well, have quite a few clients already. And what is interesting for us, I guess, is that when it comes down to the conversation around the single market, that is almost a no-brainer. We definitely need to stay in it for us to continue growing the way we are. So I guess what's interesting for a business like ours, because we focus on regulatory technology from a bank's perspective, so our clients were saying, this is going to be great. We're going to need you guys even more, which is great for our business, I guess, this whole Brexit story, but it's not necessarily where we wanted to be as a business. And so I guess there are positives in the sense that companies that have done something on the business side that is very relevant to leveraging, I guess, on the uncertainty that we're going to be dealing with, can be doing actually more business out of it, which will definitely be our case. But the uncertainties from a company's perspective that this presents in terms of being able to hire the right kind of talent, the reality is that we basically serve banks, and so if banks start reallocating quite drastically and moving offices to the different and respective headquarters. There are quite a few cities in Europe that are trying to get the fintech scene attracted, I guess, to come to their premises. So it's going to be quite important from our perspective. We're very keen to stay in London. We're very keen for London to continue being the fantastic fintech hub and capital that it is, not least because it's just a fantastic city. And I think when you think about attracting talent, you actually need to attract talent in a place where people want to live in. And when I think of the rest of Europe, there's not that many cities that have it all, which is the reality of London. But I think it's going to be quite critical for us in the next few months to see hopefully relatively clear messaging from the government and the different fintech players to see how they're going to help support the community that is at a stage of growth, which is the case for my company, and to then hopefully see the outcomes of potential plans that will be, unraveling, I guess, in the next few months, and really determine how the London scene is going to be for the next few years. So we're hoping that the right decisions will be made and that the right amount of support to keep enticing also new fintechs to continue starting and setting up in London will continue to be in everyone's minds.
Great, thanks, Diana. And just a reminder, thinking about what your comments on London as a leading fintech sector, to everyone to vote in our poll about the future of London as a fintech sector. And also, just the questions come in, and I just want to remind everyone that this is being recorded and it will be available to listen following this broadcast. And also picking up on the question of uncertainty and what will the future landscape look like, now is a great time to pass on to you, Yvonne, to get some of your thoughts on what we can expect. What's going to happen, Yvonne?
Thank you. Well, yeah, we advise a number of fintechs and more established financial services businesses on how to navigate the regulatory environment, which is obviously key to this area. I guess what we would say is probably that at the moment it would appear that rumours of a revolution or a bonfire of red tape might be perhaps premature and in fact probably quite undesirable from the perspective of fintech. I would probably divide this into two areas, the sort of short-term and maybe longer-term view. I think in the short term, we would echo Lawrence's comments at the beginning that the key thing here is to steady things, to lobby for access to the single market for fintechs to have that ability to passport. And from our perspective, I think we would see uncertainty is very undesirable in a business context and in a regulatory context. And I think the key word here is consistency with the EU regulatory environment, at least in the short to medium term. And there's technical reasons around consistency and why that's important, but even putting those to one side, just practically speaking, having a consistent regulatory environment with the EU means that you don't have to have businesses with a double regulation regime to try and adhere to. Doubling their compliance team overnight is not going to be desirable. So there's a lot of really practical reasons why the UK's regulatory regime being consistent with the EU is very desirable. I guess in the long term and trying to think about where there might be opportunities, perhaps the UK could look for opportunities to partner with other regulatory centres like Singapore and Australia. There's already good work being done around that with the FCA, and look at opportunities perhaps to create an environment that buffs off some of the rougher edges of some of the EU regulation and perhaps tries to make it a bit more fintech friendly. There's lots of examples around areas like cloud where there's a feeling that some of the regulation isn't in line with what's practical. And so there may be opportunities down the line to link up with others and lobby the EU as a group, with the EU being spearheading that as to create opportunities that might promote fintech. But I would say that feels more like a long-term option, with the short-term really being about making sure we're in the best possible position to continue to have London as a leading fintech centre.
Thank you, Yvonne. That's really interesting. And actually, some of that was picked up yesterday at the event that Lawrence mentioned earlier in Parliament. How do we think about the different options in front of us? It might be a good time now to turn to some of the questions that we have. We have one regarding VC investment into the fintech sector. Do we think that will slow down further in the wake of Brexit? And again, we don't, the issue around uncertainty, we don't know what that's going to look like yet. And if so, will we see investment from other sources to fill the gap? Lawrence, did you want to pick that up in the first?
Yes, I will, and I have to just echo Mike Laven's position that Mike and I, as two seasoned people who've been through many crises, which if you've been in financial services for a number of years, we've had a few. I think has offered the best advice to the community, which is, stay calm, deliver your product, services, propositions, meet your obligations to your staff, your shareholders, and sit tight. So in the face of uncertainty, you can't wait around for the government if it's going to take 2 years to make a decision one way or another about what a Brexit roadmap looks like and how financial services is going to be affected. I think, broadly, it is a low probability event from where we're sitting right now that any government would go to the Brexit negotiations without the single market and passporting at the top of the agenda, but that's the starting point, and clearly who knows how those negotiations are going to turn out, how long they would take. Whenever a crisis happens, whether it's venture capital or investment capital, money moves on the sidelines. We're not encouraged to see money moving out of the commercial property fund sector yesterday. We've got negative yields on fixed income. The currency's at a 31-year low. So the macro issues, unfortunately, aren't great, but happen in a shock environment. Thankfully, the governor of the Bank of England and the banks are well capitalized to deal with this. So let's hope that we don't end up with stresses in other sectors like real estate. The venture capital community we've spoken to, that whether it's foreign or UK based, is really committed to London as an ecosystem because we've got the talent here. We've got a vibrant ecosystem. It wasn't built in a year. It's the making of a number of years, and certainly the digital ecosystem we've built is really, from the beginning of 2000s, really accelerated in 2008, and you can't replicate that anywhere else, in a year. But we like us thinking we could replicate the Valley, which is an ecosystem that's been developed for 50 years in a short period of time. Those of us who are around would like to think we could replicate a bit of the Valley over the next 10 years in FinTech, which is what we've been working on. So I think you need to stay vigilant. The message from VCs is they're committed to the ecosystem, they're supporting their portfolio companies, but I think we have to expect new investments to slow until there's greater certainty. So we're looking in our own environment about how we can get to the angel capital community, the UK VC community, and the financial institutions that have been investing in proof of concepts, collaborations, and accelerators to make sure that we keep the investment and liquidity in the early stages of the market over the coming months. And we're trying to get as many effective toolkits in place to help members in order to get through any problems that we might get through. But I just think that it's a normal consequence of uncertain times to expect that. What I would say, and I think Yvonne picked this up, the FSA has taken an extraordinary leadership position at this particular time. I've been working with Chris Willard and his team, and it's fair to say we're just accelerating fintech bridges, which we already have reciprocal agreements with Singapore and with Australia. South Korea will be coming online, and we're looking at accelerating the fintech bridges in places like India and Mumbai, which is a hub. India's got 500 million consumers under the age of 30 that are very, coming up the digital sort of consumption ladder. So there are all sorts of other important things that we need to carry on with. And we've been building all of these things in Innovate Finance the last year. And I think, Lisa, the last thing I would add is we've been in the US. We have an excellent relationship with not just the East Coast fintech hubs, but the West Coast fintech hubs. And we'll just continue to grow those because the relationship really with most of the global hubs is a cooperative one anyway on both talent and capital.
Thanks for that, Lawrence. Did anyone else have? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to add something on that. So I think that it's very true that obviously the consequences on investment from the Brexit are going to be uncertainty, but that is, I think that there are certain realities as well from a startup perspective. We're in the lucky position that we don't need to be fundraising, but I think when I speak to my peers, and this is something that I think people that are in a position that can lobby for the fintech community need to be very aware of what that means practically for people who are in the process of fundraising. And so certain things from, bridge investment being pulled out to rounds being put on hold have happened as a consequence of the Brexit. And so I think to make sure that the fintech community does not suffer that much from this, certain more radical things need to be put in place to make sure that they get the right amount of support. If you think, for example, a new company for fintech that is thinking of setting up, when before London was a no-brainer in many ways, right now we'll be looking at other fintech hubs in Europe. So I'm thinking that, whilst it's definitely true that we have to keep calm and carry on and continue dealing with the uncertainty in an adult manner, what I think a community that's growing, that has been invited to come and set up in London is kind of expecting, it's probably, an actual response to the situations that they're in. Because we do have a lot of people that are in the process of fundraising where things have been put on hold. That means quite a lot for a business that has a little runway. and delivering, obviously, with your clients and investors and all of that is fantastic, and that's what you should be doing, and that's what we're doing. And we are in a lucky position, but speaking for other people that I know are not, it actually could mean closing out their companies before even really having had the opportunity to run, right? And so that's something that I would be expecting a community that's, or I guess, certain opinions that have been very keen on fintech staying here and continuing to be a hub to address in a pragmatic manner, so that companies can continue existing in London. So yeah, I would just say to be careful not to be too happy, I guess, with certain things that we have been working on as a community towards investment from abroad, and to really try to address as pressingly as possible the realities that it's going to mean for the fintech community from an investment perspective.
So I could make one comment on that, because of course I think I agree with both that investors don't like uncertainty. I think the question is, the challenge to the early stage venture community in London is who's going to be the first to step up and issue a new term sheet.
Yeah.
Yep.
This is not a theoretical discussion. This is a practical discussion. Since the fintech firms all believe in the space and believe in the location, and everybody else believes long term, the restoration of confidence that will be there just takes one investment, frankly, to bring that confidence back. Who's going to step up and do it? Yeah.
And I suppose it's ensuring the conditions are right that someone will step forward and do that.
I'd add to that point that, again, financial services and then fintech is a pretty meaty, technical, and increasing regulatory space. But given that, 50% of our members are authorized to passport into Europe now, although a much lower percentage of those are actually deploying that. And so the relative value of passporting to particularly foreign fintech investors is very high. A lot of our fintechs are either outside of regulation or they're in domestic markets and don't really have any relationship to passporting at all. It's the talent that's key, and over 30% of our own community has talent that is not from the UK, the lion's share of which comes from Europe, and so I think if you're and I think the Mike's point is, where's the first term sheet? If you're coming in particularly in a foreign denominated fund, VC fund right now, particularly in US dollars, for example, you're in a really good position to actually review early stage opportunities in the community that have very strong products in place. If as fintech has been in the early stages in remittance, the peer-to-peer, either crowdfunding or lending environments, you're outside of the regulatory regime anyway for the most part, or you're only in a light touch regulatory regime. So those opportunities are actually fantastic right now, but it'll take the first investor to come in and say, yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, just to build on that, I was just going to also add to that it has been said as well that on a more positive front that this also offers potentially an opportunity for fintechs to take advantage of the challenging environment. So while some of the more established banks and insurers are grappling with the intricacies of passporting and branches and all of that, agile fintechs can perhaps look to see what they can do in the meantime to try and advance their businesses and take advantage of this. So, trying to find some positives in this, that might be one to offer up.
Yep. Thanks for that, Yvonne. And on that note, actually, we had another question that asked, and this is one for you as well, Yvonne. Do we have any indication as to the technical changes, requirements on licensing, passporting, and domicile, or is that really just still to be TBC?
Yeah, I hate to do the kind of classic lawyer response of it all depends, but I'm afraid it does rather all depend. I would commend anyone listening to one of a number of the tables that have been produced by people like the FT describing the various in and out scenarios that we might be in, and our position around technical changes and requirements around passporting, etc., very much depends on the basis in which we engage with with the EU. I think, as Lawrence was saying earlier, a number of the options that are available are much more focused on goods rather than services, and so unless we do the EEA type of option, there will require a degree of bilateral negotiation and some quite bespoke arrangements put in place around services. So it's not something that's a sort of straightforward if this then that answer at the moment, I'm afraid, until we know more.
Yeah. I know. I think we're all looking for clarity where we won't be able to find some for quite a while. And just going back to the question on talent, which all of you raised, we had another question with regards to that. A lot of companies are keen to ensure their EU nationals can stay with them. Do you, the panel, see a way to guarantee that without the government guaranteeing those rights? So really, in the absence, I think, of any government guarantees, what can fintechs do to ensure that their staff from other EU countries can stay with them?
I'm happy to start. So we've taken two approaches. So one of them is try to explain to the staff from a logical perspective that we think it's highly unlikely that their situation here would be jeopardized, because it has raised quite a few questions for them. And as you can imagine, it's a very emotional thing if you're a European to try to think whether you have to be leaving the UK in the not too distant future. So the approach has been we're assuming that even if we ended up in a situation where we needed visas, that there would be a lot of reasonable negotiation being done for people who were already set up here to be able to stay. If anything, hopefully will be allowing us to attract talent from further parts than just Europe. And then the second thing that we've decided to do is actually to start setting up in a European country, just for purposes of having an address and some kind of office and presence there, to make sure that I guess our business as usual does not get interrupted while these kind of things are being decided.
Yeah. Did you have any thoughts on that, Mike? Okay, I think now.
Sorry. I just had.
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Listen, I think as we talked before, of course, we talk to people and logically, top tier visas are the kinds of things that logically should get approved, and logically people shouldn't have to worry. But it's not something which people respond to totally logically. This is one where more than on other things in the short term, I could use official word. If I could put a plug in here for Lawrence and for Innovate Finance. Listen, we know that the major money center banks have an issue with passporting that goes way beyond anything that I have in terms of financial stake. And one always has to worry that fintech will be sort of the roadkill on the way to some other kind of settlement. And so I think to the extent that there are trade associations and institutions, whether it's law firms or it's Lawrence himself and Innovate Finance, that can help us on this issue in terms of making it prominent, I think that's incredibly important.
Thanks. Sorry, Mike, I was just going to say thanks for the plug, and I would make the point that as with investments or liquidity or passporting, we're in a period of uncertainty, and so I would echo your words. From our perspective, the City of London, which is the Square Mile, are one of our benevolent sponsors. We work closely with everyone in the London ecosystem, and the new Mayor of London is particularly adamant about this. So at the top of the list, along with making sure we maintain access to the single market, making sure we have access to fintech talent is co-joined to that. And I extended to the Tier 1, Tier 2 visa argument, and for those of you not familiar with those visa structures, they allow us to bring in professional staff for either institutions or for the startup community in different tiers. And the City of London and the Mayor of London, the Lord Mayor of London, are promoting that. That's an important part of the London ecosystem. How that works out in other parts of the UK, I'm not sure, and how the UK Gov works that out, I'm not sure. But I think with certainly our relationship with Europe, more than anything, people in the UK consider themselves Europeans, but clearly have expressed an interest in not being in a European political system. So whether you're looking at coming to the UK and setting up a fintech to passport, now's the time to do it because we still have a passporting regime, that's up and running. And if you're looking at, talent, we've got a great talent pool here. But again, everyone is looking for a degree of political certainty. And I think we're not going to get that until at least the beginning of September here.
Yeah. Right. Well, thank you for that. That's very interesting. I think as we're running down on time, I'm going to pass over to you, Tanya, I think we have our poll results, and also just to see if you had any questions or observations for the panel.
Sure. Thanks, Lisa. So the results are now in. So I hope everybody in the audience will now be able to see how the audience voted. So the overwhelming majority says, yes, indeed, Brexit will affect the UK status as the world leading fintech hub. And, quite a few people don't know. So, and on that subject, actually, there is one question from the audience, which is, it would be interesting to see your views. Do you think that Brexit will actually really happen? Are we all in denial here? And if so, when? Because there are multiple ways and levels it can get stuck and then not go through at all. So yes, our sort of panel, you're very welcome to share your views on that.
I'm going to go first because I have to jump off. I'll stick with Mike's view. Who knows? Too early to tell. Stick to what you know rather than what you don't know, and that's the best opportunity you have to maintain your success in this environment.
Yeah, I would say it's a question above my pay grade, but I'm happy to I'm happy to take it in a pub sometime. But I have to. But in a time of uncertainty, you need to manage day to day. Long-term strategy might come down to a much shorter execution period. But I think I have to focus on, and as I said, on the constituencies that are important to the company in the near term, and build the business. But I'm happy to have that discussion in the pub with anybody. And I have a whole series of opinions which you'll be happy to hear about, but I think it's not.
From our side, obviously that would be fantastic. But I would tend to agree that you have to just plan for the worst case scenario and for being able to cope with the uncertainty as well as possible. So that would be awesome, and maybe, who knows. But I think that there is a reality that the best thing you can do is to try to cope with the day-to-day and just keep calm and carry on. Actually, it is a good expression to use at this kind of times.
I actually saw someone put something on Facebook last week saying, now's the time to panic, but I think we'll all agree that that's not the way forward.
Not helpful.
I would agree with that. And, I think I would take off my lawyer hat and probably just join Mike in the pub to answer that question. I think that's probably the safest option at this stage. But I think our advice to clients has been, you're not going to gain anything by taking your eye off the ball in terms of your business right now. So, while all of this uncertainty is going on, the key thing to do is to focus on what you do well. And when we come out the other end of this one way or the other, then you'll have a good business to fall back on.
Yeah. Just one final comment before we wrap up. We have a comment rather than a question. I like the answers. I agree. The only certainty is uncertainty, and which pub and when.
So I'll let the journalists figure out a location, but I'm happy to show up.
Okay. So next it'll be Brexit in the pub. We'll keep you posted on that.
Yeah.
I just want to thank our panel. It's been a great discussion, and thank you to Tanya for joining us. That's all we have time for. There's obviously a lot to address, and we couldn't get to every question with regards to what the future shape of our relationship looks like with the EU and how the UK FinTech sector will adapt and evolve to those changes. So we will be keeping an eye on this as it progresses. And I'd like to thank everyone for joining, and we will certainly keep you posted on future webinars and our upcoming FinTech Futures events. So thanks again to everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.